Welcome to Dan's Crypto Adventures. I've got another video for you guys today, and the reason I have this video is because I've got a problem, and that is my Miner 1, I know the very original name, is full. So I need to start making my next miner, Miner 2, and so that begins with a frame. And so I've it's a decision between wood frame, metal frame, purchasing a frame online, buying a shelf and mounting the components directly to the shelf. There's lots of options out there. I think I'm going to go ahead and go with the metal frame again, similar to this one. This here, Miner 1, is a 6-card rig. My next one is going to be a 8-card rig. I want to go a little bit bigger. I'm not sure I'm ready though to get into the 12, 13 card rigs. So I'd like to maybe step it up to 8 and see how that goes. So I'll show you this rig a little bit. I'd like to keep kind of the general design the same. So I'm going to kind of maintain, the metal frame around the bottom, metal frame around the top with the supports that are metal, the bracing and the wood piece here support the cards. One error I made in this frame here is this piece of metal right here. The intention was for it to be going this way. But this card here at 1070 is not an issue, but if you look down here at the 1070 Ti's, it is an issue. If this piece of metal had been going the other way, it would hit that card. Luckily, all I had to do was turn it around, so it went like this direction, and then it worked fine. So I'd like to avoid that error on the next build. Also in this build, I've got the 2 power supplies, one here kind of at the back facing the side, one here facing the front. I think I'm going to do it differently to where I have one here on this side and then one on the other side of the main board as well, with the main board right in the middle, and then the cars going across the top. So I think that's the design I'm going to go with. So let me get this rig out of the way, and then we'll start laying out the new pieces of metal for the next one. Alright, so the first thing we need to talk about is the materials that we need for the project. For the last rig that I built, I used this right here. This is 1-inch aluminum angle, so it's 1 inch this direction and 1 inch this direction. And this is 1/16 inch steel. Again, it's aluminum. This rig is going to be bigger, it's going to hold more cards, so I'm going to increase the thickness of that a little bit to this angle right here. It's the same 1 inch and 1 inch, but the thickness here is 1/8 of an inch instead of 1/16 of an inch. So if we put the two together, I hope this works on camera, you can see this one here is quite a bit thicker, but the dimensions are the same. And again, the reason for that is just so the rig's going to be bigger, it's going to be heavier, and I don't want anything flexing or bending once I get it all put together. So that's going to be the material. We're also going to use some wood slats to support the main board and the power supply, and also the risers as well. And for that, I'm just using 1x4. Just any local hardware store would have that. And then to attach the metal to other metal pieces, we use this right here. This is a number 8 3/4 inch self-drilling screw. So it looks like that. So I'll be using a bunch of these, so you need a pretty big box of these, maybe 2. Also to secure things to the wood, for example, the main board, when we secure it down to the wood, the risers, when we secure it down, we're going to use a number 6 3/4 inch wood screw. So that's what that looks like right there. It's just got a straight point on the end. It's for wood, it's not for metal, so it's not self-tapping. But most of the woods we're using for this are soft, so you don't need to pre-drill anything. Just use simple pine or poplar or something like that, and it'll go right into it, no problem. So that's the material we're going to be using for this project. So the first question we've got to ask ourselves is, how big are we going to make the rig? And I can't necessarily answer that question for you. It depends on how many cards, what type of cards, where you're going to put it. If you have a shelf you're going to put it on, there might be some constraints to that. There's all kinds of variables. So what I do is, if you're into mining, especially GPU mining, you end up with boxes galore. So we've got boxes everywhere. So what I've done is, this piece of cardboard right here is the same size as my main board. Now it is a tiny bit bigger. We're not building a piano. It's not perfectly square, but it's pretty close to the size that we want it to be. And then we have the power supply. So this is the end of the power supply, and I've got two of those. Again, they don't need to be perfect, just need to be pretty close. And then we've got the GPU. So this represents the size of the GPU. For this, I just measured a GTX 1070, 1080, 1070 Ti. 1080s, 1080 Ti's could be larger. If you physically have one, you can hold it up to it and kind of measure it, or you can look on the manufacturer's website to get the size. But for me, this is kind of easy to have this to kind of go by. I'll kind of show you how it got these. Luckily, I have a lot of these components already. So for the power supply, so this right here is another GTX power supply. So I just kind of set this on here. It's pretty close to the same size, so we're close enough. We're not building a piano. And then for, again, the GTX 1070 Ti, it is this big. Now if you notice, I'm going to the bottom of the piece of wood right there, the bottom of the riser, and I'm just going to the top of the metal right here. The GPU actually sticks above that. But for me, it doesn't matter. These are open air rigs. It doesn't matter to me if this sticks up. All right, so now I've got my pieces. I've got my graphics card, my main board, power supplies, the end of those. So now we just need to kind of start laying it out to see how we're going to lay it together, to see how big we need to make the system. The other thing we need to remember is this is the graphics card, the side view of it. We need to think about, so this is the side view, we need to think about how much space we need. My other rig, I have about 1.5 inches between the cards, and then most of the cards themselves were about 1.5 inches wide. So you need to do the math on that to figure out how the overall length you need your mining rig to be. The other thing you need to remember when you're looking at the overall length is the pieces are L-shaped. And so if this is the side of the, or the back or the front of the rig, this is going to come into that space. So you need your measurement for the rig to be to this edge, not to the back edge. Hopefully that makes sense. So you just got to take this about 1 inch into account when you're laying everything out. It's going to be a little bit smaller by about that amount. So let's start laying it out. The other thing we need to remember is kind of orientation. Let me show you the other rig, one thing on it. So in this particular rig, I've got one power supply right here, and then I've got one more on the back right here. For the one I'm building, my intention is to do a power supply here, and then one over on this side. Now I do put the power supplies up like this. I do recommend that. The reason is the fan on the side. This fan sucks in air, and then it blows air out the back. And so this fan pulling in air, you need it to have clean, cool air. If it's pointing up, if it's laying, this power supply is laying on its back, and this is facing up, then it's pulling hot air from your graphics cards into the power supply and then blowing out the back, so that's not good. The other option would be to lay it flat with the fan facing down, but you can see there's not very much room below the board, so it's going to restrict airflow there. So I recommend having this fan pointing out and this straight out one side. So again, your orientation may differ. It may be like this, or one here, one on the back. It could be like my next build is going to be one here and then one here on the other side. So let's go back to my table, and we're kind of going to lay out how I'm going to put mine together. Alright, and so here's how I intend to lay out my components. I've got the main board, power supply on its side, air pulling in from this end over here, pointing this way. This power supply pulling air in from this direction, and it's blowing it out the front. So that's how I'm going to orient them. I can fit my 8 cards in here easily, so not a problem there. Right now this is about 26 inches apart. I do need to add 1 inch each side to add for this dimension here on the angle iron. So I think I'm going to make mine 28 inches wide. That's an outside dimension. So the outside of the angle iron on this side, or the outside on this side, is going to be 28 inches. And then I can get my graphics card, which is going to be in here like so. going straight back. Again, it comes to about 14 inches that I need. I like to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to go 16 inches outside of frame on the front to outside of frame on the back. So I'm not worried about height, where this is at height at this point. Right now I'm trying to lay out the main board on the bottom, the frame, and then I'll do the frame on the top, which is the same. And then I can look at the vertical piece and what kind of height I need. So outside to outside, I'm going to go 28 by 16. So I'm going to cut those pieces and screw that together, and I'll show you when I'm done. Alright, so we got the frame put together. So again, this will be the bottom. It'll sit like so. Now it doesn't necessarily matter which way you do this. I have the back on the inside of the side pieces. You can do it the other way. It really doesn't matter. Whatever you decide, though, just be consistent. Do it the same way. So for me, this is the front rail and the back rail are always going to be inside of the other one. So again, doesn't matter. Just be consistent. So that's our bottom frame here. Let's grab our pretend components and lay them out. So the main board, this will go here kind of like so, and this on this side. So looking good. I got plenty of room. Nothing's cramped. There's plenty of space. Also, these cardboard pieces are a little bit bigger than actual because why not? Our graphics cards are going to sit like so. Remember, the graphics cards will not go all the way to the front because of this piece of metal right there. So they'll actually be more like that. So I got a little room here in the back. I left it a little bit extra, again, just because I don't want to have it too tight. So there we go. So now I need to make another one. Again, this one will be the bottom one. I need to make another one just exactly like it. That'll go on the top like so. I'm still not concerned about the height. I really haven't gotten to there yet. Once I get the top frame and the bottom frame put together, then we'll talk about the height and how we kind of come up with that. So I'm going to put together another one just like this. So hang on. Alright, so we got our bottom frame, top frame put together. The next step is to put the pieces of wood. They're going to go front to back here. That the main board, the power supply, all that will sit on. And so I've cut some pieces of wood here that will go front to back. I've got 5 or 6 of those. You've got to kind of lay out the components to see exactly how many of those you need and where to put them. And you are going to need your actual main board for this. So here is my main board. So let's just kind of lay these out in here. Alright. Now the reason we need our actual main board is if you look on there, we've got to make sure that we have something under all of the screw holes to attach to. So I like to kind of lay this in here. Make sure there's generally 3 lines of screw holes right there, and right there. So that actually, the way I just threw them down there seems to work fine. And then we've got to have our power supply cutouts as well. This is the ones that are the footprint for what's going to be on the bottom. So we want to kind of lay them out where they're going to go. Again, we want to make sure there's a piece of wood underneath them to properly support them. So again, how I randomly threw these down seems to work pretty good. Now one thing I do want to show you, I'll need to take off the camera here. And that is, so this is a 1-inch angle iron. These are 1x4 pieces of wood. If you notice, the piece of wood is below the top level of this metal. So if I were to attach the main board like this, I'm not going to be able to access some of these lower plugs right here. It may not be an issue. That's the HDMI right there. Some of the graphics ports. I'm going to lose a couple of USB. So it may not be a huge problem on this board. Some boards it could be a big problem. On your power supply, you might not be able to attach some of the screws, mounting points that go on the bottom of the power supply, so that could be a problem. So we need to raise that up somehow. And the way that we do that, I do that, is I cut some shims. These are actual just wood shims. Again, you get at Lowe's or Home Depot or that kind of place. And I'm just going to set it in there. and then put this piece of wood on top, and now it's going to line up pretty, pretty flush. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect, just needs to be pretty close. Right now it's a tiny bit above. And then the challenging part of this is a screw needs to come. This is how the frame's going to sit, and so I want the screw to be on the bottom coming up through that small piece of wood and into this one. So I've got to flip the frame over, kind of get this piece of wood lined up with this piece of wood, and then screw from the underside up through it. And so what I like to do is go through and put kind of a pencil mark kind of where I want the boards to end. And then I'll transfer it to the top side of this piece of metal. So I'm going to kind of flip it over and kind of show you guys how I do that. But again, you do need, or at least my experience, you do need this little block of wood right there to raise this up so it's flush. So I'm going to set this up and show you guys how I attach these boards, and then I'll start attaching them. So hang on just a second. Alright, so I flipped my frame over. So this is the bottom side of the bottom frame. And then these are the wood slats. They're going to go front to back. And so I'm going to screw through these holes into this board. Now remember, I've got to have a shim in there. Right now you probably can't see on the camera, there's a gap right here. So this board is laying on the table, and then the angle iron is sitting on the table as well. So there's a gap right there. So I need to fill that. So what I use is just a simple wood shim. And it fits in there almost perfectly. Then I just cut it off. And so I get a bunch of little blocks like so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide that in there under each, 2 screws in each one. So I'm going to do that on this side and then this side and go on the next one. I did go through and put a line as to where to put all these so I can get everything lined up. Because again, it's kind of upside down, so it's kind of hard to figure out where to put these on this side. So when it was turned the other way, I made some marks as to where all these boards should go. And so now I'm just lining it up with the marks that I made. So I'm going to go through and attach these boards with that shim in there on both sides. And then once that is done, I will show you guys what that looks like. Alright, so now we've got all of these slats screwed in with the shim in there. So let's flip it over and see how it looks. So it looks good, so we've got them spaced out properly. Let's grab the main board and make sure that it lines up at the front. So it's going to go about here. Alright, let me show you this. So again, we've got all the screw holes, have a piece of wood underneath them. The rows do, all the rows of screw holes. And then also, the piece of wood here is more or less flush with the front of the metal. So we will be able to access all of our ports here on the front. So that was successful. So great. So the next step is to look at the height of the frame itself. So we've got the bottom here, we've got the other frame there in the back. That's going to be up here somewhere. We've got to figure out the height, how high to make it. So let me get set up for that, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. Alright, so now we're ready to figure out the height. So we've got the bottom frame with our slats. The top frame is our built. The next question is, how high do we need to make it? Does it need to be here, here, here? We need to figure out how high it needs to be. So let's go back to our trusty cardboard. We've got the one that we did for the graphics card, so it will sit, more or less here. The length is about accurate, and the height is accurate from this is the bottom of the riser to the top of where the frame needs to be. And then I cut one more piece of cardboard. Let me show you what it is. So we're going to go over here to my other rig. So this piece of cardboard is the height of the power supply. So it's a little bit higher, but it's pretty close to the height of the power supply. The width, this way isn't accurate, but I'm not worried about that right now. Right now I'm just worried about the height. We've already got the width of our frame here figured out. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold this one here. It's going to be sitting on this piece of wood, which is roughly even with the top of the metal frame. Then we're going to have our graphics cards up here. Now we do need to remember there's going to be a piece of wood between here that goes this way that our risers are going to rest on, and then that's going to hold up the graphics card. So we need to have room for that. That's going to be a 1x4 So it's about 1 inch for that, about 3/4 of an inch. Then we want a little bit of extra room for airflow and that kind of thing. So you might need some help here, but for me, I know it's going to be from the bottom of the frame to the top of the frame is going to be 16 inches. So I measured that a couple minutes ago, so 16 inches. The next thing I want to talk about is attaching those corner pieces. We're going to end up with 4 pieces. This is just a scrap piece of metal that I had laying around. This is not the right size or anything. I just kind of wanted to illustrate a point. Right now the frame is sitting on those screws that attach this piece of wood. So we've got 2 screws here, 2 here, 2 here, all the way down the line. So that is actually what the weight of the frame is on, and I want to maintain that because that's a pretty even support. So when I attach this piece of metal, I don't want it to go all the way down, because then this piece of metal is going to be supporting the frame. So I'm going to lift it up off the table just a tiny bit. An easy way to do that is to take a scrap, another shim, just put it right there. It doesn't need to be perfect, and then run this down till it hits that, and then screw the piece in. That way you end up with a little bit of a gap between the vertical piece and the table, so there's not going to be resting on that vertical piece. So I'm going to get 16 of these vertical pieces cut. They're the proper size. Again, this one right here is not the right size. I'm going to get 4 of the 16 length pieces of this 1 inch aluminum angle iron that is 1/8 of an inch thick. So let me get that put together. Alright, so now we've got the 4 corners screwed in. I've got 1 screw on each side going into the bottom frame. Right now nothing's attached to the top. If you look close, you can see that they're not quite straight up and down. I find you don't need to worry about that quite yet. When we put it on the top frame, that'll kind of straighten everything out. And so these are 16 inches. Yep, 16 inches. And I didn't run this piece of metal all the way to the table. It stops a little bit short to give it a little bit of room. So now I'm going to put on the top frame, and it's just going to sit on here. This is kind of sitting there like that. Again, I need to kind of bend these into place, but it's not too difficult. See, just stretch them in there like that, and then I'll go through and screw all these in. Now I do want to try to pick which will be the front. So if this is going to be the front, I do want to try to make this line right here level, just because that's where all the rigs will be mounted. Because I'm going to have a board here midway that the back of the graphics card is going to sit on. And so if this is level and I make this level, then everything will line up together. If one of those is off, then the cars might not be stationary. So try to make this level if you can. Alright, so now we've got the top put on here. So now we need to do what I think actually is one of the hardest parts. And that is we're going to take another piece of angle and put it right over here, and then one on the other side. And then we're going to have a piece of wood that comes right there, and then rest on the other one on the other side as well. And this is what the graphics cards are going to sit on. So the graphics card will sit up here, and then the riser will sit on this block of wood. And the reason I say this is the hardest part is because it's very difficult for me anyway to figure out what height to do it. So we're going to show you a couple of tricks, tips that I have for that to get it lined up properly. And to do that, we're going to need a graphics card. Alright, so here's the graphics card. It doesn't matter which one actually, because they're all the dimensions are all the same, and so any one will do fine. And then it is you do want to attach the riser, which is what I'm doing right now. So we got a graphics card with the riser on it. Alright, so like so. So you want to get the piece of wood lined up as well as the piece of metal. A couple things to note: on the back of the riser, there's screw holes. There's 2 towards the back and 2 towards the front. I usually don't worry about the ones in the front. Just try to get the ones in the back, just to make sure that when those are screwed in, it gets in the wood well. Get it all lined up, make your marks on the metal, and then you can attach the piece of metal to the sides. So I'm going to do that now. So I have attached the bracket on this side. I've not attached the piece of wood or the bracket on the other end yet, and I wanted to show you guys a couple of things. One thing I do want to note is the bracket. I made the pencil mark and where to put it based on the graphics card being on this side with the riser attached, and then I installed it a tiny bit lower, about a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch lower, and I'll show you why a little bit later on. So a little bit lower than you would think. So now need to do kind of the same thing, but it's easier now that you have that piece of metal on that side. Put your piece of wood on here, hold up your metal bracket on this side, put your graphics card on, and find where it needs to be located. And now's a good time to kind of slide it across, you know, make sure it works everywhere, make sure your piece of wood is going to be lined up as well. So now's a great time to kind of find where it is. Again, we're going to mark where the metal piece should go on this side, but we're going to screw in the metal piece a tiny bit lower, just like 1/8 of an inch or so lower than the mark. Alright, so I've got the angle, aluminum angle on each side now, and I got the piece of wood laying here. Now I did drill some holes through it and also in aluminum to get it lined up. And remember, our goal there is to, when the GPU bracket is on the front here, we want the piece of wood to line up with the holes so we can get a screw through that hole into the wood to secure it. I really don't worry about the front one. You could put another piece of wood here if you're worried about it. I just worry about getting the two in the back. I feel like it's pretty good. So we got it lined up, but now we need to, so I'm just using, I'm in the construction industry, so I have random nuts and bolts and screws and all kinds of junk laying around. So I just kind of fashioned a screw with some washers and a nut on there, just kind of secure it into place. And so this side actually looks pretty good where it is. Okay, so there, looks pretty good. So I go down here, it's getting too low down here. Yes, it's quite a bit too low right there. So what I use here is shims. These are just like the wood shims I used earlier, but these are just kind of plastic. So I cut a piece of those the right size, drilled a hole through it, and now we're going to put it under the piece of wood. So we're going to lift up the wood and put it right there. And then we're going to put our bolt with the washers on it. And now we're going to try, so that would have lifted up that end, but not this end. So now we're going to try our graphics card again, all the way across. Looks good there. Looks good there. And looks good there. So we got it. So now we're going to secure this piece of wood right here down to these angled pieces on the sides. And then I'll be back. Alright, so now we've got the piece of wood on there to support the GPUs. A couple other kind of fit and finish kinds of things I've left to do. I always like to go around with a file, look for any sharp edges, and just kind of knock those down. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect, but you are going to move this thing around. Your hand's going to be around reaching through here. You don't want to hit one of these sharp edges and cut yourself. So I'd recommend taking a few minutes to go around and do that. And then also, when you have this thing full of GPUs, and power supplies and things, if you pick it up and carry it around, this angle is kind of sharp. It does hurt your hand a little bit. So I just kind of took a couple scrap pieces of 1x2 just pine and just kind of knocked off the edges. Doesn't need to be perfect, just to kind of so it's comfortable in the hand. And I'm going to screw it right here on the inside of this angle piece, and put a screw right through there and there to hold it. That way when I pick it up, I'm not holding on this aluminum angle. I'm holding the piece of wood, so it should be a lot more comfortable to carry around. So I'm going to go ahead and put that piece in. Alright, and so here is the finished product. So this is the finished frame that we just built. So kind of show you guys a few different angles of it, so you can see how it looks and how everything kind of fits together. So again, my intention for this is to have 8 cards, as well as 2 power supplies. So there's an overview of it, and just to compare to my first mining rig, it's a 6 GPU rig. You can see the size difference. The new one is a lot bigger. The first one doesn't really have any problems overheating, but I just felt like it'd be nice to make it a little bit bigger with the additional cards and everything, just to help with the heat a little bit. So it's definitely significantly larger. But the first one's been doing great. No problems really at all with it. Well, there you have it. There's my tutorial on building my second mining rig frame, an open air GPU frame for 8 cards. So if you have any questions, feel free to post a question down in the comments. And please, as always, give me a subscribe and a like if you enjoyed this video. And thank you guys for watching. Hope to see you soon. Thanks.